This deals with, I saw this piece from blackenterprise.com. Okay. A very good article. This deals with how a new book reveals how the U.S. stole $600 billion from African Americans through unfair taxes post-slavery, unfair taxes after slavery ended. And I want to go to this article here. Let's see. This is at blackenterprise.com. Just a second. Let me pull this up here. Okay, this one right here. So this article came out April 24th, 2024. All right, let's look at this one here. Okay, let's close out this ad. Okay, a new book reveals how the U.S. stole $600 billion from African Americans through unfair taxes post-slavery, after slavery ended. And I've talked about this topic before, and I've talked about how there was an article from the Washington Post that dealt with how African Americans are overtaxed when it comes to property taxes by 13%. Historically, this is one of the ways that land was stolen from us, over assessing property value. Okay, over assessing, I should say, property tax responsibility, and then we can't pay the taxes. Then we lose our farm, lose our land. So this article is from April 24th, 2024. Andrew W. Carl, K-A-H-R-L, Andrew W. Carl, a professor of history and African American studies at the University of Virginia, put extensive research in his new book, which describes how U.S. bureaucracies created the nation's ongoing racial wealth gap by implementing a system of highly unjust municipal and state taxes, a system of highly unjust municipal and state taxes. Bloomberg reported the black tax, 150 years of theft, exploitation, and dispossession in America is the name of the book. Bloomberg reported that this book shares statistics, studies, and tales of African Americans being cheated out of land ownership, and pushed into poverty by racist laws and practices dating back to the Jim Crow era. Now, racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race. Racism is not about calling people racial epithets, calling people racial slurs. That's bigotry. Racism is the power structure. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy. Racism occurs when one race of people control the majority of the wealth, power, resources, privileges, benefits, land, access to opportunity, access to employment, politics, laws, political office, media, healthcare, education, etc. And this is designed to marginalize and subordinate and do harm to another race of people. This is what racism is. And this comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy. Okay. So this is totally different than calling somebody racial epithets. That's bigotry. Racism is the power structure. Quote, this history sheds new light on the forces generating economic inequality in America. The forces generating economic inequality in America and the racial character of those inequalities. Professor of History and African American Studies Andrew H. Carl said. The book pairs personal stories with rich details about municipalities nationwide that used complex tax collection to fund distribution to white land and property owners. Okay? Details about municipalities nationwide that used complex tax collection to fund distribution to white land and property owners, and the economic dynamics spanning over a century of the United States history. Starting in the late 19th century, the late 1800s, and early 20th centuries, early 1900s, unfair tactics were used to doubly disadvantage Black landowners by artificially inflating property value estimates for tax collection. Artificially inflating property value estimates for tax collection, overcharging them for their land, and exploiting their inability to pay as a means to seize their properties. Historically, this has been one of the ways that our land was stolen from us. Examples include Anthony Fleming and J.R. Rooks, two Black men forced off their farmland by white supremacist mobs who went on to establish a town with the goal of enabling Black Americans to own land. By 1911, Edmondson, Arkansas encompassed 30 square miles of stores, a bank, a hotel, and a post office for local Black homeowners. However, 20 years later, the town was no more after white plantation owners plotted to seize the land by imposing taxes on lots the Edmondson, Arkansas residents were unaware of. Once the residents failed to pay the taxes they had no clue about, the plantation owners seized the land. It was deeded over to one of the plantation owners who had concocted the scheme and demolished all of the buildings. In 1920, Hillary Thomas Stewart, Hillery, Hillary Thomas Stewart Sr., lost 24 acres of land in a tax sale, quote, under dubious circumstances, after the great-great-grandfather of George Floyd failed to pay $18.83 in taxes. George Floyd, who was killed May 25th, 2020 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Okay. In 1920, Hillary Thomas Stewart Sr. lost 24 acres of land in a tax sale under dubious circumstances after the great-great-grandfather of George Floyd failed to pay $18.83 in taxes. Losing the land forced the Stewart family into poverty. When looking at the 11 million acres of land taken from African Americans, it equates to $326 billion in today's dollars. Not to forget the millions in taxes African Americans have overpaid for a century. The millions of dollars that African Americans have overpaid over a century. From 1870 to 2020, African Americans were overtaxed by more than $27.5 billion in 2023 dollars. Professor Andrew Carl doesn't just focus on the grim findings, but he does share possible solutions to making up for the century of financial oppression against the African American community. He suggests the establishment of a federal fiscal equity program that mirrors Canada's approach, where funds are allocated to local governments based on their needs. He also suggests introducing a universal home tax exemption for numerous Americans, especially lower income homeowners or those residing in historically neglected areas. Another option would be to impose taxes on the wealthiest individuals in the U.S. Professor Carl says this is the past that we live with today. This is the past that we live with today. But it does not have to be our future. The name of the book, once again, is called The Black Tax: 150 Years of Theft, Exploitation, and Dispossession in America. The book was released on Wednesday. That would be Wednesday, April 24th, 2024, and retails for $35 through the University of Chicago Press. So be sure to purchase this book. I'm going to get a copy as well. Purchase this book. Read this article from blackenterprise.com. New book reveals how the U.S. stole $600 billion from Black Americans through unfair taxes post-slavery. Now, we've talked about this tax scheme before here on the African History Network show. And there's an article from the Washington Post that deals with how historically African Americans have been overtaxed when it comes to property taxes. This piece right here from WashingtonPost.com: Black families pay significantly higher property taxes than white families, new analysis shows. Black families pay significantly higher property taxes than white families, new analysis shows. Unfair property assessments led to widespread overtaxation of Black Americans' homes. Now, we saw the same thing here in Detroit, okay, where homes in Detroit were overassessed by $600 million in property taxes, and many African Americans lost their homes. This piece right here is from July 2nd, 2020 by Andrew Von Dam, okay, for the Washington Post. And in this article, it says, state by state, neighborhood by neighborhood, Black families pay 13% more in property taxes each year than a white family would in the same situation. A massive new data analysis shows. Black-owned homes are consistently assessed at higher values relative to their actual sale price than white homes, according to a new working paper by economist Troop Howard of the University of Utah and Carlos Avenancio Leon of Indiana University. African Americans have long said they bear a disproportionate burden for taxes that support local police, schools, and parks, but nationwide measures of this type of systemic racism are hard to come by. Okay. Now, these are all laws and policies that have to be changed. These various loopholes have to be closed. To expose the structural and historical factors behind these discriminatory property tax assessments, the economists analyzed more than a decade of tax assessments and sales data for 118 million homes throughout the country. Okay. To expose the structural and historical factors behind these discriminatory property tax assessments, the economists analyzed more than a decade of tax assessment and sales data for 118 million homes throughout the country. In almost every state, property tax assessments were higher in areas with more African American and Hispanic residents. In city after city, the authors show it is not just differences in the buildings or land, but also the racial composition of the neighborhood that matters. Also, the racial composition of the neighborhood that matters. The gap between white families and minority households remains large. The gap is 10%. When you combine data for Hispanic and Black households, the authors excluded California because Proposition 13, passed in 1978, drastically changed how property is valued there. Okay. All right. So read the rest of this article here from the Washington Post. Black families pay significantly higher property taxes than white families, new analysis shows. And when we look at the California Reparations Task Force, when we look at their report and we look at the 12 harms that they laid out, and I talked about this in my presentation that I did for the Detroit Reparations Task Force, the presentation I delivered March 2nd, 2024. And you can watch that lecture. It's on our social media platforms. It's on my Facebook page, The African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep. And we air it periodically. The Detroit Reparations Task Force laid out, the California Reparations Task Force, in their 1,000-page report, they laid out 12 harms, okay? And they deal with the history that happened in California, the history that happened to African Americans in the United States, and they show how these 12 harms happened in the U.S., but also happened in the state of California. Then they lay out 115 policy recommendations to repair the damage. 12 harms detailed in the California Reparations Report that happened nationally and in California. Number one, enslavement. Now, we know in California, they've identified somewhere between 1,500 to 4,000 slaves, because California came into the Union as a free state in 1850. Okay, so California does not have a deep history of slavery, but it does have a deep history of racism, housing discrimination, voter suppression, etc. So number one, enslavement. Number two, racial terror. Number three, political disenfranchisement. Number four, housing segregation. Number five, separate and unequal education. Number six, racism in environment and infrastructure. Number seven, pathologizing the Black family. Number eight, control over creative, cultural, and intellectual life. That deals with theft of royalties when it comes to music and different things like this, and how our artists were ripped off of their royalties. Control over creative, cultural, and intellectual life. Number nine, stolen labor and hindered opportunity. Number 10, an unjust legal system. Number 11, mental and physical harm and neglect. Number 12, the racial wealth gap. Okay. So read the California Reparations Task Force report. And their report is the most extensive study on African Americans since the 1968 Kerner Commission report. The full report is here. Let's see. Let's go to this here. OAC.gov. And it's loading. Full California Reparations report. The executive summary is 74 pages. If you read the executive summary, you're going to get a huge education on this history and what's happened to African Americans across the country. But this is the full 1,080-page report, and they lay out 115 policy recommendations to address the harms that have happened. They have a table of contents here also. But when we look at the executive summary, now, variations of this happened all across the country. Variations of these harms happened all across the country, okay? So you can take these 115 policy recommendations. What needs to happen is really we need to shift the focus from talking about slavery in 400 years, shift the focus talking about that to present day structural inequities and deal with the laws and policies put in place that created those structural inequities. And then trace that back to legacy of slavery if it dates back to that, but definitely it'll probably go back to the Jim Crow era, et cetera, early 1900s. And take these 115 policy recommendations and create versions of this at the federal, state, and local levels to start repairing the damage that's happened to us. Okay. So we're going to have to, that is something that is much more doable and you can actually get put in place than thinking that you're going to get $27 trillion or 14 trillion, or that's not going to happen. And I told you, based upon Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, non-discrimination federally assisted programs, race-based policies are illegal at the federal level also. And very few people know that or actually want to acknowledge that. Okay, so this is why now in California, you have a similar law. So this is why in California, any type of reparations that are going to be distributed is going to be based upon lineage, because race-based policies in the state of California are illegal also. And they want to make sure, the California Reparations Task Force, they want to make sure that any laws that get passed, anything that gets put in place, they want to make sure it doesn't get struck down in court, because they know there are going to be legal challenges. If we look at this slide here, California's unprecedented reparations report details 150 years of anti-Black harm, 150 years of anti-Black harm. The report finds that the damage to Black communities is extensive, and that a variety of intentionally crafted policy, judicial decisions, and racism by private actors has created a widespread exclusion of African Americans that has not been sufficiently addressed at any level of government. Quote, almost 150 years of active, conscious federal, state, and local government action and neglect of duty have resulted in compounded harms that are unique to African Americans, the authors wrote in a draft reviewed by NBC News prior to its release. Okay, read this article from NBCnews.com, June 1st, 2022. This is when the preliminary, their 500-page preliminary report came out. Okay, so read that article there. California's unprecedented reparations report details 150 years of anti-Black harm. Okay, so hopefully you learned a lot on today's show. If you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have the information there as well, and register for the online history classes that I teach. We have our class on Saturday, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, so this deals with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. We teach the class on Saturdays, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Next classes are Saturday, May 4th, May 11th, May 18th, and May 25th. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. Okay. The class is on sale. Is on sale right now, $60. Regularly, $60. Regularly, $130. The content is PG-13, so you can use this with your children also. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded, so you can go back and watch it anytime. And you scroll down the page, we have the the class lesson plan here as well. So all the class lesson plan here for each class session is here. You can download the class lesson plan. Okay, so we go through and look at over 200 slides that I put together, 80 to 100 articles, the 15 books that we reference. You don't have to buy any of these books to follow along in class. I've been teaching this class since 2017. So I've been studying history 34 years. I put together this class as well as the second class that we teach, that we have starting up probably in June. Okay. All right. So register for that, and we'll see you in our next class. And I want to post this information here. Okay. All right. So remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever.